Have you ever spent years earning something, only to discover that the hardest part begins after you've already paid the price? Have you ever looked around a crowded room and realized that everyone has already decided who you are before you've spoken a single word? Imagine carrying 14 months of grief inside your chest, holding a first-class boarding pass in your hand, and still being treated like you accidentally wandered into someone else's life. Because that is exactly where this story begins. Not with applause, not with recognition, but with a request that slowly becomes a public humiliation. And before this flight lands, one person will discover that the weight of assumptions is much heavier than the truth and far more expensive. Dr. Amara Cole boards the aircraft without looking at anyone for longer than necessary. She has learned that eye contact often becomes an invitation for judgment. At 44, she has mastered the careful rhythm of moving through airports almost invisibly. Her navy coat hangs neatly over one arm. A leather satchel rests against her shoulder, softened by years of hospital corridors and overnight shifts. The carry-on suitcase behind her rolls with quiet precision, as though even its wheels understand they should never interrupt anyone. She pauses only once. Seat 2A. She looks down at the boarding pass, then at the seat, then back again. For just a second, the smallest smile appears. It isn't excitement. It is relief. 14 months ago, her husband, Daniel, had promised her something during one of the last conversations they would ever have. He had laughed while unpacking another airline receipt from yet another exhausting medical conference. One day, Mara, we're going to stop pretending economy seats build character. Next time we fly somewhere together, we're sitting in first class. She had laughed too, because neither of them believed they would ever spend money that way. There were student loans, her mother's medication, research grants that never stretched far enough, mortgage payments, hospital fundraising dinners. Someone always needed something. Comfort always came last. Daniel never got that first-class flight. A distracted driver ignored a red light 14 months earlier. Promises can disappear faster than people. Now Amara is flying alone, not toward celebration, not toward vacation. She is traveling to see her mother, whose heart has grown weaker with every passing month. The anniversary of Daniel's death falls tomorrow morning. For the first time since losing him, she decides to honor the promise they never kept. She buys one first-class ticket, not because luxury matters, because memories do. She gently places Daniel's wedding band, which she now wears on a chain beneath her blouse, against her heart before sitting down. Outside the window, the afternoon sun reflects across the runway in soft golden streaks. Inside the cabin, everything smells like fresh coffee, polished leather, and expensive silence. Across the aisle, a businessman barely notices her. A retired couple smiles politely. A young flight attendant named Jenna greets passengers with practiced warmth that has begun fading under 12-hour shifts and constant evaluations. Jenna notices Dr. Cole. She notices the elegant posture, the carefully folded coat, the tired eyes, the boarding pass. Then she continues greeting the next passenger. Nothing seems unusual. For exactly 38 seconds, Richard Halsey enters the cabin with the confidence of someone accustomed to believing systems exist primarily for his convenience. He is in his early 50s. Perfectly tailored charcoal suit, silver watch, designer luggage, phone already pressed against one ear, discussing seating arrangements for an upcoming medical conference sponsored by the airline. He rarely raises his voice. He has learned something more effective. He speaks as though disagreement is simply impossible. His eyes move across first class almost automatically. Leather seats, business executives, luxury luggage, older couple. Then they stop. On Dr. Amara Cole. His expression changes only slightly. Most people would miss it, but prejudice rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives as confusion. Sometimes as certainty wearing the mask of common sense. He waits until Jenna approaches, then quietly tells her there appears to be a mistake. That woman is sitting in the wrong seat. Jenna glances toward 2A. She answers that everyone scanned correctly during boarding. Richard smiles politely, suggests she verify anyway. just to avoid embarrassment. He says it softly enough that nearby passengers cannot hear every word. But they hear enough. Enough to begin watching. Enough for silence to spread. Jenna hesitates. Company policy echoes inside her mind. Always verify customer concerns. Avoid onboard conflict. Protect premium passenger experience. She has 2 children waiting at home. A mortgage payment due next week. Her supervisor recently warned her about customer complaints. One more incident could mean unpaid suspension. She knows how quickly one difficult interaction can become a report. She also knows something else. The woman in seat 2A does not look confused. She looks tired. There is a difference. Still, fear often speaks louder than instinct. Jenna walks toward Dr. Cole. She lowers her voice. She asks if she might quickly see the boarding pass. Amara immediately hands it over. No irritation. No defensive explanation. Years inside hospitals have taught her that calm often survives longer than pride. Jenna studies the ticket. Seat 2A. First class. Everything is correct. For one brief moment, relief crosses Jenna's face. Then Richard appears beside her. He asks whether there was an issue. Jenna quietly explains the seat is correct. Richard looks directly at the boarding pass. Then back at Dr. Cole. He says there must be some kind of computer error because this simply doesn't make sense. Those words float through the cabin like invisible smoke. They never mention race. They never need to. Everyone understands what he means. Amara slowly lifts her eyes. She asks one simple question. What exactly doesn't make sense? Richard shifts comfortably. He explains that premium cabins occasionally experience booking glitches. That airline staff should double-check before departure. He insists he is only trying to help. He smiles while saying it. Some smiles are sharper than anger. Jenna feels the atmosphere changing. Passengers stop pretending not to listen. Phones remain in pockets. Eyes remain fixed. One elderly man frowns. A college student 2 rows back looks uncomfortable. No one speaks, because public courage is much rarer than private agreement. Amara quietly reaches for her satchel. She removes another confirmation email. The purchase receipt. Her identification. Every document anyone could reasonably request. She places them together. There is no shaking in her hands. Only exhaustion. Jenna looks through everything. Every detail matches perfectly. She whispers that everything appears valid. Richard exhales impatiently. He says perhaps someone from the cockpit should make the final decision. After all, if another passenger purchased that seat, delays could become expensive. The word expensive hangs strangely in the air, as though dignity costs less. Jenna knows there is no reason to involve anyone else. She also knows refusing a prominent passenger's request could create its own report. She presses the interphone. Request assistance. Dr. Cole says nothing. Outside, baggage carts continue moving beneath fading sunlight. Inside, time slows. She watches airport workers through the window instead of looking at the people watching her. Because grief has already taught her something important. The opinions of strangers cannot compete with the absence of someone you love. Her mind quietly slips backward. She remembers Daniel asleep beside stacks of neurology journals. She remembers hospital cafeterias after midnight. She remembers him teasing her for carrying too many patients home inside her heart. He always said she believed healing required remembering every face. He wasn't wrong. She still remembers them all. The little boy who spoke after surgery. The violin teacher whose tremors disappeared. The grandmother who recognized her granddaughter again after treatment. Victories never erased losses. They only taught her to continue. She returns to the present when footsteps approach. Captain Ellis enters first class. Professional. Calm. Used to solving problems quickly. Jenna explains the concern. Hands him the boarding pass. He studies it for less than 5 seconds. Then confirms the assignment is correct. That should end everything. Instead, Richard politely asks whether identification should also be verified, just to ensure tickets were not transferred improperly. Captain Ellis looks surprised. Airline policy does allow identity confirmation under certain circumstances. Rare circumstances. This is not one of them. But procedures exist, and procedures can become shields for bias. Amara hands over her driver's license without being asked twice. Captain Ellis compares the names. Everything matches. Again, there is no mistake. Richard remains unconvinced. He says quietly that he organizes executive medical events for the airline. He knows many first-class travelers. He has never seen her before. Captain Ellis replies that airline seating is not determined by familiarity. An uncomfortable silence follows. No one applauds. No one tells Richard to stop. The retired woman across the aisle grips her husband's hand. She wants to say something. She truly does. But she worries about escalating tension, about missing the flight, about becoming part of the story instead of merely witnessing it. Fear rarely introduces itself as cowardice. It usually arrives disguised as practicality. The cabin falls completely still. This becomes the quietest moment of the entire journey. The engines have not even started. Yet Amara feels more exhausted than after 16-hour hospital shifts. She excuses herself softly, walks toward the forward lavatory. No one follows. Inside the tiny room, she locks the door. For the first time all day, she allows herself to breathe without pretending to be stronger than she feels. She rests one hand against the sink. The other touches Daniel's wedding band beneath her blouse. Her reflection stares back. Dark circles beneath gentle eyes. Shoulders carrying far more than luggage. She whispers something almost too quietly to hear. I kept the promise. I finally bought the ticket. I just wish you were sitting beside me. Her voice breaks only once. Not because of Richard. Not because of the passengers. Because grief never checks calendars before returning. She closes her eyes. Lets exactly 3 tears fall. No more. Then she washes her face. Straightens her jacket. Opens the door. The woman who walks back into first class is carrying the same pain. But now it is settled once more beneath quiet dignity. Jenna notices the redness around her eyes. Guilt tightens inside her chest. She wants to apologize. She wants to tell everyone the conversation should have ended 10 minutes ago. Instead, she says nothing, because fear still has a mortgage to pay. Boarding finishes. Cabin doors close. Another passenger enters first class at the last moment. A woman wearing an airline executive badge. Vice President of Public Relations. Olivia Bennett. She apologizes for boarding late after attending meetings at the terminal. She places a portfolio inside the overhead compartment before noticing Captain Ellis standing beside seat 2A. She asks whether something happened. Captain Ellis quietly summarizes the misunderstanding. Olivia turns toward Dr. Cole. Their eyes meet. Recognition arrives instantly. Olivia smiles warmly. Dr. Cole, what an unexpected pleasure. I was hoping we'd have a chance to welcome you before tomorrow. The cabin grows still for an entirely different reason. Richard blinks. Olivia continues naturally. The airline has honored your joining this year's Neurological Innovation Summit. Our CEO has been talking about your keynote for weeks. We weren't expecting you until tonight. Thank you for agreeing to headline the conference. No one speaks. Richard's face slowly loses color. Jenna looks from Olivia to Dr. Cole, to Richard. The silence becomes almost physical. Olivia notices the tension. She asks whether she interrupted something. Captain Ellis carefully explains everything. Every request. Every verification. Every unnecessary delay. Olivia's expression changes. Not into anger, into disappointment. The kind reserved for moments when people choose suspicion over humanity. She asks one quiet question. Dr. Cole, were you asked multiple times to prove you belonged here? Amara answers honestly. Yes. Olivia nods once, then looks toward Jenna. Were cabin cameras active during boarding? Jenna answers yes. Audio too. Richard suddenly begins explaining that he only wanted to avoid confusion, that misunderstandings happen, that he never intended offense. His words arrive too late, because intentions matter, but actions leave records. Olivia thanks him for clarifying, then calmly reminds him that his company currently manages hospitality operations for the conference. Richard nods. She continues. Our ethics committee reviews all incidents involving sponsor events, especially those affecting invited speakers. Another silence. Different this time. Heavier. Richard finally understands something. He did not merely question a passenger. He publicly humiliated the physician whose name appears across tomorrow's conference banners. The neurologist hundreds of specialists traveled across the country to hear. The woman whose research helped reshape stroke recovery protocols. The keynote speaker. The guest of honor. The face printed inside the welcome folders already waiting at the hotel. Richard lowers his eyes. His confidence disappears faster than it arrived. Jenna feels tears threatening behind professional composure. Captain Ellis quietly returns Dr. Cole's identification. This time he thanks her, not because she proved anything, because she remained gracious when grace was never owed. Olivia asks whether Dr. Cole would like to move to another seat for greater privacy. Amara smiles gently. No, this seat took me 14 years to earn. I like to stay exactly where I am. Several passengers lower their heads. The retired woman finally speaks. She apologizes for remaining silent. She says she should have trusted what she already knew. That dignity deserves witnesses, not spectators. One by one, others quietly agree. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for truth to begin replacing silence. Jenna kneels beside Dr. Cole before takeoff. Her voice trembles. She apologizes, not with rehearsed corporate language, with honest words. She explains that fear made her forget the difference between policy and fairness. She says her children are growing up watching everything she does. She hopes they never learn the lesson she almost taught today. Amara reaches across the armrest, places one hand over Jenna's. She tells her courage is rarely born during easy moments. It usually begins the second after we realize we were wrong. Jenna quietly cries, only for a moment, then stands. The aircraft finally begins pushing back from the gate. Outside, sunset paints the sky with deep amber light. The engines rise into steady power. Inside first class, something else finally lifts. Not embarrassment, not status. Truth. Richard spends most of the flight staring through the window. He drafts apology emails, deletes them, starts again. He realizes prejudice never required hatred. Sometimes it only required believing that success looked a certain way. That belonging had a familiar face. By landing, he has scheduled a meeting with his company's ethics board. Not because public relations demands it, because private reflection finally does. Months later, the conference introduces new bias awareness training for every sponsor, organizer, and executive partner. Airline procedures change as well. Identity verification protocols become clearer. Discretion becomes mandatory. Multiple staff members privately credit one quiet passenger who never raised her voice. Dr. Amara Cole never mentions the incident during her keynote. Instead, she speaks about the human brain, about recovery, about invisible injuries. Near the end, she says something the audience never forgets. The deepest wounds are often the ones no scan can detect. Healing begins the moment someone chooses to believe another person's humanity before questioning their belonging. The auditorium stands together, not because she embarrassed anyone, because she reminded everyone what medicine was supposed to protect. Weeks later, Jenna watches the keynote online from her apartment. Her children sit beside her. She tells them something simple. If someone is standing alone while everyone else stays quiet, look again. That is often where courage is needed most. Across town, Richard watches the same speech. He never hears accusation, only responsibility. Sometimes mercy teaches harder lessons than punishment ever could. Dr. Cole eventually visits her mother. They sit together on a porch wrapped in blankets as autumn arrives. Her mother notices the first-class luggage tag still attached to the suitcase. She smiles. Daniel would have been happy you finally did it. Amara looks toward the evening sky. She smiles too, not because the journey was easy, because promises can still be honored, even after the people who inspired them are gone. Some people believe first class is about wider seats, better meals, more legroom. But people like Amara know something different. First class begins the moment you refuse to let someone else's assumptions determine your worth. Justice does not always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it arrives quietly, recorded by cameras, witnessed by strangers, remembered by everyone who almost stayed silent. So let me ask you one final question. If you had been sitting on that airplane, would you have found the courage to speak before the truth was revealed, or only after everyone else finally knew who she was? If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who believes dignity should never depend on appearance, because the weight of truth is heavy, but it always finds its way home. Asterisk, this is a fictional story. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental. Asterisk.